What Simon and I are going to do this time is, rather than do any battles live, is we're actually going to work our way through the refights by means of pictures, which are a little easier to explain to you what happened in the 3 battles that we've fought today. So let me kick off. So we're going to be working on the Battle of Cannae, possibly the most famous battle in ancient history, certainly one of them, used to this day to train in the military academies about envelopments. So it's still an interesting battle to this day. I've fought it quite a few times. If I just bring a bit of the history of wargaming in it, I've refought it 9 times now with 5 different rule sets before having a go with Meg, going right back to the late 70s. It's a difficult one to refight in some ways. I have to say it's never really worked in any of those previous refights. It's worked partially in that the strong wing of cavalry on the left flank of the Carthaginians has tended to do well and tended to work through and tended to come back. The side with the Numidians has never worked terribly well, and the centre has never felt anything like historical, according to what we had. So, coming back to this is a fun wargaming day that we've had, taking on the challenge to see if attempt number 10, or by now I've played it a few times, feels better in Meg. Let me give you a bit of the background history as an amateur historian, and as a more professional historian, let dear Dr. E chip in and add a bit more depth. But just to bring about, first of all, the story of the campaign and the origins of the Second Punic War, which he was part of. If you go back and watch the First Punic War and work your way through that, the defeat of it was quite catastrophic for Carthage. They lost Sicily. And Sicily was a really big economic asset in the Mediterranean at that time. So it was a huge loss to lose Sicily. There was a very punitive indemnity charge actually put on Carthage. There were actually 2. And they were resented to quite some degree. So there was a fair bit of resentment from the First Punic War about Carthage feeling a defeated nation with some bitterness in the way it was treated. I think the other thing that happened that was a major issue, and I think Simon might comment on that, is naval power changed completely at this time. At
Very
the time
important.
of the First Punic War, Carthage was probably the primary naval force in the Mediterranean. And after the defeat in the First Punic War, it was pretty much lost as a naval force. And I think it's fair to say Rome had probably taken over, Simon. Do you agree with that?
Can you hear me okay? Because I can't see my picture on the screen.
I can hear you, but you're a little quiet.
Okay, I'll put the mic a little bit nearer. There we go, try that. It's really important here to remember that Carthage is primarily an economic superpower. So it's a trading nation. These are Phoenician settlers in North Africa. They had this maritime trading empire across the western Mediterranean. And their conflict with the Romans in the First Punic War absolutely totally disrupts it, because what they do is they lose control of the open ocean. So they therefore can't guarantee being able to get their trading ships wherever they want to. They can't guarantee being able to get their military forces around the western Mediterranean wherever they want to. And, you know, a lot of the places where they're settling are on islands, etc. They've lost their base in Sicily. And so the loss of the maritime power is a vital component in this transition period between the First Punic War and the Second Punic War.
Fantastic. And that actually leads into why the next war started from Spain, because they needed new economic resource, but they needed a new economic resource they could get at without clashing too much with Rome. So the next thing that Carthage focused on is Spain as a source of wealth. And there were lots of resources in Spain, particularly a lot of silver, actually, in Spain. It's fairly well away from Rome. So Hamilcar, was Hannibal's father, Hamilcar Barca, plus his son-in-law Hannibal, they landed in Spain in 237 BCE. And actually, Hamilcar did some very fine diplomatic work. There were no huge battles to speak of. There were clashes of various sorts. But through some clever diplomacy and forging of alliances with the Spanish tribes, he managed to get a fair bit of control in Spain at that time. The Romans were bothered by this, and actually the city of Massilia, which is modern-day Marseille, prompted a treaty out of their worries, and that set some terms for Carthage, which was now led by Hasdrubal, because Hamilcar had passed away, that they must not cross the river Ebro. And the River Ebro is quite an interesting place. I've been to it. I had a house in Spain. If I actually can find, if this pointer is working, down here. So I've been along all of these bits of Spain. The River Ebro is here. So it's between Valencia and Barcelona. So they were barred from crossing beyond that into what would be seen as more Roman-aligned territory. But the interesting twist in it is there was a Roman-aligned town, fairly major town, called Saguntum down here, which is about 200 miles south of the River Ebro. And ultimately that town and the clash around it was the casus belli of the Second Punic War, is what Hannibal used to trigger war with Rome. It was a very interesting place. It was a Roman allied town, but it had a very fractious leadership group. So if we build on to what happened actually, and then Hannibal's long march to Italy, in 219 BCE, he starts off at Carthage, which is modern Cartagena, which is down here in Murcia. It's near the famous La Manga gold complexes of modern times. And then advancing north, he actually besieged Saguntum for 8 months and broke it in a siege. And in part used the excuse of what was going on within it. There were very murderous disputes going on within it. And there was a big pro-Rome faction and there was a pro-Carthage faction as well. And quite a number of the pro-Carthage supporters were slaughtered. And he used that as an excuse to capture the place. Mid-July, he broke the official truce by crossing the Ebro and forcing his way across the Ebro. And by September, he'd reached Massilia here. And the Romans had actually evacuated 2 legions over to Spain, sent 2 as reinforcements to Spain, and put out a call for reinforcements to Sicily. And then subsequent to that, he did the very, very famous journey over the Alps with all of the elephants, which is renowned and is in a number of famous paintings that have been done in that sort of era in a very classical style. And started off with these elephants and lost most of them going over the Alps. It must have been a very tough passage. It's a really interesting story as to which pass they went through. There are about 5 passes that are possible and 3 that were the main candidates. Some recent archaeological research from about 2 years ago, I think was the first time I saw it, has felt it's proven now that they crossed at the Col de la Travesette, which is one of the 3 top candidates. And they think they proved that because around the watering areas where the army would have had to water, as they've dug it up, they've found a lot of soil compression and feces and stuff that are representative of an army and what would happen if you had an army around the watering hole, and especially things the weight of elephants. And I guess they've managed to prove it ultimately by finding some elephant dung. So that may have proved the case of how they got into Italy. And once in Italy, the scary times for Rome really began. There were 3 encounters prior to Cannae. There was a large cavalry skirmish at the river Ticinus, which is where the Romans were forced to withdraw and cede passage. And the Spanish cavalry that were with him, so the veteran cavalry had with him, Gallic cavalry and Numidians, forced that passage. In December of the year, in the winter, there was the Battle of Trebia, the first major battle near a place called Placentia. It's sort of here in north central Italy. There were some elephants at that battle, the last remaining ones from the journey over the Alps. It was quite a clever battle from Hannibal, showing some tactical nous. He had an ambush force of cavalry under Mago, quite cunning use of it, that managed to come in as a flank attack. And it was a pretty serious defeat for Rome. It's quite interesting as to whether it was sensible to give battle. And one of the big things about the story we're going to take you through between myself and Dr. Elliott is actually the Roman political system played an enormous part in what happened in this campaign. So Sempronius fundamentally wanted to become famous and wealthy and wanted to triumph, wanted to walk through Rome as a hero and gather all the prestige and the wealth that goes with it. And that pressured him into giving battle to Hannibal at the Battle of Trebia. Simon, would you like to just comment on the political system and how it put that kind of pressure into the Roman military system?
Absolutely, yeah. So if you imagine yourself as a senatorial class Roman, and you look at your career as a young man through to maturity, you're going to pass along a set piece pathway called the cursus honorum, and each place that you stop on the cursus honorum is a post of increasing importance, ultimately becoming the consul. Now, firstly, remember that as the aristocrat, when you're being educated, two of the key things you're educated with is, on the one hand, the law, and on the other hand, martial skills, because you know that as you progress as an adult along the cursus honorum, you're going to have to defend yourself against legal attacks from your rivals, because all the senators are big rivals to each other. And also you're going to have to defend yourself, fight. You're going to have to fight and lead soldiers in battle. So legal skills and martial skills. And ultimately, if you're successful, you become the consul, one of the two consuls. Remember, you're only the consul for 1 year. So you have this very narrow window to make yourself the most famous of Romans. So therefore, if an opportunity presents itself to kill or fight against the ultimate bad guy of the day, Hannibal, you're going to jump at the chance. And I think this is one of the reasons, not only with the battles you're talking about at the beginning of the campaign, Simon, but ultimately when we come to Cannae, a battle is fought which the Romans, in my mind, didn't need to fight.
Yeah, and as you've talked about that more with me, I think it's a fascinating comparison, isn't it? Because it's almost as if you've got a very short time to make yourself famous and successful. So in sort of music terms, which is something I've done a lot over the years, you get 2 gigs to make an impact, and if you make an impact, then you're rich and famous. But the interesting bit with this is, for their own personal wealth and success, they actually don't mind too much if they lose a bunch of legions doing so. Because the upside for them is massive if they win. The downside, if they lose, is yes, they've lost some legions and they go home in the main. So it's very interesting the way the political pressure with that 1 year time horizon to make yourself a success and wealthy and politically strong has dominated quite a lot of Roman history as I've started to reread a lot of it. Carrying on the tale, there was then a bigger disaster for Rome in a way, because at Lake Trasimene, which is further south here in the centre of Trebia at the top, through somebody here, he managed to quite cleverly ambush an army that hadn't detected his presence in fog, walking around the side of a lake in column of march. And it was a total disaster for Rome, and 4 legions were ambushed and largely destroyed in a massacre. So there was a lot of problems emerging as Hannibal came down into this area, especially with the massive Gallic support he had of people who were quite anti-Rome that he managed to gather to his cause. But a long journey yet to go before we finally get to Cannae, which is positioned down here, actually on the eastern coast in the southern part of Italy. If we take the build-up to the actual battle itself, it's really fascinating, and Simon can come in and comment again and bring back those political points. Hannibal pillaged and burned the farmlands in the heartlands of Italy, and he was always trying to bring the Romans to another decisive battle, possibly in part because he depended on allies, and it must have been questionable how long he could have spent on campaign with a lot of allied troops who typically will lose the will to fight after a while when there's a lack of plunder and success to be had. But he caused mayhem and had Rome in a fair bit of a panic. A gentleman called Quintus Fabius Maximus was elected as emergency dictator to respond to this. But actually, really interestingly, there's quite a lot of dispute going on in the Senate, and his powers were quite limited compared to certain other dictators we could look at. He was left to actually raise a garrison for Rome and recall the legions, to do a defensive strategy in the hills, try and win a logistic war. He refused battle, promoted a containment strategy. It was quite difficult. It was quite difficult anyway, because of Roman dictatorships were not very much in favour with something that rather liked being a republic. It smelt too much. Oh, Richard's just put it here, actually. I've just seen a note come up. It felt too much like creating a king, which was something they weren't terribly keen on. So basically, the Fabian strategy was one that was passive towards Hannibal. It was quite defensive. It was a containment strategy. And eventually, the appointment came of Gaius Terentius Varro, who was appointed as a consul to defeat Hannibal in the field. And the elected consul to work with him in the twin consul system was Lucius Aemilius Paulus. So we have Varro and Paulus, the 2 names we know from the Battle of Cannae. But a very interesting pair of characters again, and only having a year to make a name for himself. Varro was quite an aggressive character and wanted to force battle. He was said to be the son of a butcher and quite a tough character. Paulus was quite a thoughtful character by repute and had a lot of respect for the successors that Hannibal had had. So you have two very different characters in charge jointly of a Roman army. And that Roman army in itself is a very interesting one because it was made up of 8 legions, which made it the biggest army in Roman history at that time. But 6 of them were new. They raised an enormous number of troops afresh to face the challenge of Hannibal. Only 2 of them, legions 1 and 2, were experienced legions. All of the others were new legions. And they were large. They were probably double legions, which explains the numbers in Polybius and Livy. There's lots of talk at various points about the legions having 1,000 extra infantry and 100 extra cavalry. And we know that legions of that time typically was a Roman legion with a sort of a brother allied legion made up of non-Roman Italian troops. So there was a huge army put in the field. And at the time, you ended up near the river Aphidius, and both sides actually camped opposite each other on the river. And the build-up is absolutely fascinating because it really brings out the differences between Varro and Paulus and the way they were looking at the situation. They alternated command on alternate days, and I'll let Simon comment on that in a minute when I just run through the story of what happened in the build-up to the battle. But it was a confused system and one that was probably quite costly to Rome on a few occasions. The day before the battle, the armies deployed. They actually deployed for battle. And there was a skirmish, a fairly extensive skirmish, where the Carthaginians lost heavily. The report of casualties are around 1,700 Carthaginian losses to 100 Romans. But Paulus was in charge and refused to allow that skirmish evolve into a full-scale battle. He actually held the line and retired to the camp later in the day. Something Varro didn't particularly want to do, I'm sure, given his character. And Hannibal actually was very keen to have a battle. One of the things that's quoted is him saying something along the lines of, well, those losses are not very much if it encourages the Romans into a fight. So he was clearly trying to draw them into an extended fight, but it didn't happen. On the actual day of the battle, a different situation emerged. The biggest problem for an army, especially of this scale out in the field, is going to be to supply itself, especially with water. It can live without food for a little bit, but it can't live without water for very long. And the water had to come from the river. And on the day of the battle, the Numidians were sent out to harass all of the Roman servants and soldiers and teams going out to be water bearers to bring water into the camp. And Varro, in response to that, decides it's time to actually fight the battle. He's in charge today, and he crosses the Aphidius with his troops and deploys for battle between the river and some rough going in hills on the other side, with the Romans opting for a very deep formation in the center of the battlefield. So a very deep, strong, heavy infantry with 2 thin cavalry flanks. Simon, this twin command system ran through quite a bit of Roman history, and perhaps you can just say a little bit more about how it works and when they used it and when they stopped using it, and how it led to maybe some other interesting possible calamities or problems for them in the military.
Well, it tended to only be used when there was a serious crisis at hand. So you tend to find that most of the campaigns outside of Italy in the later Republic, you just have one of the consuls of the year in charge. And the Romans usually are far, far more successful when they only have one consul in charge of a campaigning force. Think of the Roman victories at Cannae, Magnesia, Pydna, etc. But when you look at examples where the Romans have 2 consuls with the armies in play at any one time, again, we'll look to another crisis, and this is the Cimbrian Wars at the end of the 2nd century BC, when the Cimbrians from the sort of Jutland Peninsula, Frisia and Saxony have hacked their way through Gaul and are threatening the Roman interests in the south of Gaul. So the Romans realise they've got a problem here, and they throw 2 consuls with 2 consular armies at the Cimbrians, and they get annihilated. And it's the same reason, as we'll find out later in our presentation, when you have this dislocation with a diarchy of command, because it just doesn't really make sense. And you have with the characters Paulus and Varro, 2 very different people. And we see in the narrative history of the battle, the different natures of the individuals actually play a part in the Roman defeat. So to my mind, the Romans are more successful when they have only one consul in play, less successful when they have 2.
Interesting. So let's look at the armies and how we start to reflect the armies. So I'm going to give a little bit of background, and then I'm going to invite our list-meister, Richard Jeffrey Cook, to say a few words about some of the options, because obviously there's a few different ways you can approach a refight. But just to give a little bit of background, Hannibal's army had varied quite a lot, actually, as it evolved from his departure in Spain all the way through to his arrival at Cannae and eventually over to Zama. In fact, actually, very early on, because I like the Second Punic War, I did a set of special lists, which just reminded me I should go back to an update where there were 6 different lists for Hannibal for different specific periods during the journey. So as he set off forcing the river Ebro, he had quite a lot of regular troops from Africa, and he had the Numidians, and he had quite a few Spanish allies, and I think the best number I could find was about 40 war elephants, perhaps. By the time he got to Massilia, he was gathering more anti-Roman allies from southern Gaul to replace the losses. It's also interesting that I think about that time he sent a reasonable number of Spanish troops back to Spain to reinforce Spain. Over the Alps, he lost most of the elephants, of course. At Trebia, he got a large Gallic force gathered that fought with him, and the last real elephant force took part in a battle. Trasimene was yet more Gaul from Cisalpine Gaul, from the area in northern Italy. And by the time he got to Cannae, he's got a very interesting army, because he's got the Gauls and the Spaniards now are trained parts of his army that have been with him quite a long time and have quite a lot of experience of battle. But there are no elephants left. The African spearmen by now are pretty much all equipped with high quality armor from Roman casualties from the previous battles. And the Numidians are now the veterans of both those battles, and actually quite a large number of skirmishes that are going on around the sides that we don't read a huge amount of in detail, but around river crossings and fords and such things. So his army that got there was about 40,000 infantry, 8,000 African spearmen, 5,000 Spaniards, but the largest single number being the Celts. Giving him a total of about 32,000 heavies and about 8,000 skirmishers. And he had 10,000 cavalry, 2,000 veteran cavalry, which were in fact Spanish cavalry, those veteran cavalry, 4,000 Celt cavalry, and about 4,000 Numidians. On the other side, the regions that were raised, you could think of as being double legions. For every Roman legion, there was an allied legion to go with it. So you had 8 times 5,000 Romans and 8 times 5,000 allies. To give you a whopping great number of 80,000 infantry. And within that, a little bit from Syracuse in archers and slingers. They put about 10,000 defending the camp, which somebody invented the theory that was all the Triarii, but I think that's extremely unlikely. And Richard Jeffrey Cook made a very good case, and I think it's the right one, that they wouldn't have put the Triarii all there because all of the troops came from Paulus that were in the camp. And for that to be the case, you haven't got enough Triarii. So much more likely they put one of the 8 legions there. So we have 80,000 infantry on the Roman side, an enormous army, 8 double legions, 45,000, roughly speaking, Hastati and Principes, and 10,000 Triarii, 52,500 heavies to 32,000 heavies on the Carthaginian side. So a big advantage there. Massively more skirmishes in the skirmish screen, but a real weakness in cavalry in numbers relative to the Romans, with only 6,000 cavalry to the 10,000 on Hannibal's side. So I think with that, I'll just introduce Richard and let him come on board and talk a little bit about the lists for the later Carthaginian and the mid-Republican Romans as we have them in Meg. Richard, as if I just find him here, Meg presenter, while he's coming online. He's done an amazing job leading the list work. I've been very blessed actually to have had a group of very good people get interested in what I've been doing with Meg and play a fantastic role in developing the rules after I set off originally doing some lists. We now have the most amazing total of lists online. They're all free. There are I think there are over 650 now on there. Richard has played the lead role in creating all of them, but with a lot of input from probably a good dozen people fairly extensively, and probably a few hundred in terms of comments on the forum. We've made it an amazing communal effort, of which I'm very proud. And he's doing yet more work on them now about armies and enemies. So with that introduction, can I, if Richard, you can put your sound on, I think that's the only thing we might be missing.
Hello, Simons.
I can just about hear you. I'm going to put us into this mode so you can actually see him. There he is. Welcome, Richard. Thanks for
Hi,
coming.
Richard.
Hi, everyone. So thank you, Simon. Before we begin, I'll just mention, I mentioned in the chat, so I'll show it to you here. This is Roma Invicta, which is the board game from the Society of Ancients, which refights the campaign of Italy. And it's got some really good mechanisms because it's basically the more successful the Carthaginians are, the more reluctant the Romans are to fight, which makes a really interesting campaign dynamic. So yeah, I'd thoroughly recommend that for running the campaign, and then you can fight all the battles using Meg. So it's a really good game.
How good is that?
Comes with a neat map of Italy as well. So so that makes it worthwhile. It's really cheap. So available from the Society of Ancients website. Anyway, moving on to the army list. So with our armies, we've got Rome on one side, which is a mid-Republican Roman army, and we've got Hannibal in Italy from the later Carthaginian list on the other side. So with the Romans, the main interesting choice is really around the classification of the legionaries. In the list, they can be average or superior. They're impact weapon and shield cover, and they also have the option of melee expert. Given the performance at Cannae, then you have to say, well, how good should they be? And it's probably that they're mostly going to be average, potentially even poor, arguably, if you give them melee expert. So bearing in mind that the ratio of heavy infantry is 5 to the Romans, 3 to the Carthaginians, the challenge is not making it too easy for the Romans to win the battle. Moving on to the Carthaginian side, then we're with the options for Hannibal in Italy. So the Gauls can be formed, which makes them a bit easier to fall back under the legendary leadership of Hannibal. You've got the African spearmen, who are veterans and superior. I think they well deserve that classification in the battle. And you've got the Gauls. Now, the Gauls are the interesting ones because we keep them in the army lists as devastating chargers. But for this battle, it's arguable you don't necessarily want them to be forced charging. So there may be an argument there for either converting them to impact weapon because they were mixed in with the Spaniards, and Polybius, who this is my Penguin classic copy, but you can get it online as well. He describes how the Spanish in their white and purple trimmed tunics are interspaced with the Gauls. Alternatively, maybe you could classify the Gauls as short spear and maybe unskilled javelin, and perhaps even upgrade them to superior if you do that. So there are different ways of classifying the Gauls and getting the balance for the armies. And I think that's what makes this battle particularly fascinating, is you can play about with the quality of the Romans and the quality of the Carthaginians, see how it matches out in the points totals for the armies, and then play the battle and see how it works out. So the other thing I think to mention, yes, is the Romans who were defending the camp, which would Paulus left 10,000 of his troops there. Whether they were the poorest legionaries and he didn't have confidence in them, or whether he had another plan. He certainly intended for them to attack Hannibal's camp, and they did in the battle. And in fact, Hannibal, after he's winning the battle, actually has to detach some of his troops to rescue the camp. And he then successfully actually captures most of the legionaries who were stuck on attacking the camp. So that's another interesting aspect.
Yes.
I think this morning, Simon, you mentioned that one suggestion was having the legions 4 deep and having the front rank as average and the rear 3 ranks as poor.
I think the suggestee, Peter Cross, is actually with us today.
Oh, right. Well, I think that's a good suggestion. Peter will be happy to hear. So I think that's another option worth investigating as well. Certainly, in my experience, the skilled Numidians are quite effective at fighting off the Allied cavalry, and the veteran Punic cavalry, led by, as Simon mentioned earlier, by Spanish. So I think there's a good argument that they could be classified as short spear, unskilled javelin, maybe with shoot and charge, rather than the current classification of just short spear. They are well capable of beating the Roman cavalry on the Roman right flank and enabling the Carthaginians to do their sort of envelopment of the Romans. So the challenge is, can the Carthaginian infantry hold up for long enough for the Carthaginian cavalry to take the advantage?
Just to add a couple of things from our side, I'd encourage everybody out there to try some of these refights. We're recording them and writing them and putting them up. There's no totally right or wrong way to do it. As Rich is pointing out, there's quite a few ways you could interpret the battle in the rules to get broadly the right sort of feel. And it's fascinating for people to play those games, put them on Facebook and put them on the forum so we can all see them and see how it evolves. So please do pick up the material and try out some of these interesting additional ideas. I myself am going to show you a major what if of mine a little later in the show, which proved really interesting to play out actually, and relates to a little bit some of the stuff Richard was talking about the 8th Legion at the camp possibly getting involved in the battle. So it really is well worth doing. And if I can do a last plug for the Society of Ancients generally, anybody who's listening who isn't a member, he's also the treasurer. So do sign up and join us. It's a fantastic thing to be a member of. I look forward to getting my slingshot. It always arrives about 2 weeks later than anybody else's here, but I always look forward to it arriving in my mailbox in South Africa.
Great.
Thank you, Richard, for doing that.
Thank you, guys.
I will drop you back to an attendee for now, and we will pick it. Let's pick up the story some more then. So quite a few ways we could do it. Let me tell you the story of the actual battle, just for anybody who doesn't know it, to do it very quickly. I think most people have seen enough about the battle. So this is broadly speaking the setup that both Simon and I have used in different scales of the battle. You have the River Ophidius on this side with a large fortified Roman camp, with one of the legions set out to defend it in the way that I've done it, and there's a fortified Carthaginian camp over here. These camps must have been enormous. I mean, if you think there are 130,000 troops on this battlefield, imagine what the supply system must have looked like for both of these to keep them going. There must have been pretty substantial logistical problems. And that would be the challenge for both sides. Hannibal actually had to roam around Italy to gather enough food for his army by raiding the various farms. And the Romans wouldn't have found it that easy, even with their talent for supply, to cope with having an 80,000 man army out in the field. So we've got the supply side here. Then as they deployed, the Romans have got their 7 legions in the center deployed deep, with a screen of leves in front of them. They've got Paulus's side on this side had the legion of the camp, and the screen has a thin cavalry screen of his better Roman cavalry. And on the other side, you had the allied cavalry over here on this wing. If we take the Carthaginians, it's got it set up with 2 competent commanders on my version. The main strong cavalry wing under Hasdrubal here. The Numidians mashed on the Mahabal on this side, where there was rumoured to be some roughish terrain down here. And then you get this very famous crescent deployment that's talked about in the histories, with the Gauls and Spanish spread out in a way that looks set to try and absorb the weight of the Romans, and the African spearmen deployed on the wings with the intent, it claims, to actually break in on their flanks. Although I could equally imagine they were set up so that the strongest troop we had were next to the cavalry, where we were most likely to win the battle. So if there was a problem here, at least there were 2 solid sort of fulcrums here around which the cavalry could work. So I could see 2 reasons you could actually be setting up with them on the wings there. We've got Hannibal as a legendary general. So in the game with 5 cars, he should have a lot of flexibility to do some various clever maneuvers, if you like, to buy time in the middle with this shape here, which was referred to as a bow shape, I think, in the actual original things. Rich has just reminded me, not crescent. That was a later word used by various people, but a bow shape. So at least we know that ancient bows look like that. And the center is spread quite thin with loose order troops all along here. These are all close order troops. So in the rules, close order troops can shove back loose order troops. So we may get some of that effect cutting in our games. The battle went in phases. The beginning, there was a bit of a skirmish tussle in the middle, which didn't last terribly long. And then the next bit was a main cavalry attack by Hannibal on this side, and the Roman legions clashing with the center line. The second cavalry attack here was stalled and slow to make progress against the Allied cavalry on this side with the Numidians. It was getting there, but it was relatively slow in the reports. And then what you got was the line being driven back, or being pulled back, or falling back. We don't know exactly how it happened, but the definite displacement of the line here backwards, exposing the flanks to the African spears. And the cavalry on the Carthaginian left won the day, broke the Roman cavalry, who they outnumbered quite substantially, and swung round the back and actually did two things. They actually assisted the Numidians in finishing off the Allied cavalry and then spun onto the back of the Roman line. And thus you ended up with this double envelopment, as it's often been termed, with the cavalry crashing back into the Roman legions and something of a massacre going on in the middle with enormous losses for Rome. So what have we got in the rules without doing anything fancy, actually? No special rules. We have some things that might allow this to feel a little bit more like the historical reports. The first thing is with a legendary general, with Hannibal with 5 cards, it's quite likely he'll be able to recover wounds or fall back in the face of the enemy or break off from combat and create a second charge phase. And that will all help to buy time, which is the main thing he's trying to do to make it work. The second thing is we have a shove rule. When I developed the rules originally at the very beginning for shoves and shatters, I did move bases back a half base width every time, but it became painful to do it. And I discovered it wasn't really necessary for most games. So we don't do it in a time limited game where you've got a club evening or if you've got a competition game, because it's fiddly and it consumes time that's far better spent on other things. But it is actually in the rules that you do shove things back if you get shove effects on them and push them back a base width as an optional rule or impacto. So all we're going to do is use that optional rule here at Cannae because it's perfect for it. So the Romans will push the center back, and Hannibal may be capable of pulling his center back. So that bit might work. The other thing that's true in Reg is because we've separated shooting and general quality, we can have poor troops who are skilled shooters and we can have superior troops who are dreadful shooters. So we've managed to represent Numidians as being average skilled shooters. So they are actually very good with their javelins, which is what they were renowned for in ancient history and being a favoured mercenary of that era. So they actually are quite useful. I can remember trying to play these games years ago when I was a big DBM player, and I like DBM very much as a game, so it's not to talk it down. But when it came to refights, it was often a struggle to get anything to work very realistically. And here it was because Numidians were all light horse ordinary, which was probably your least favourite troop type to have. It really had nothing special and would really struggle to break down anything with cavalry on the other side. In Meg, you'll find they do break them down gradually and they do cause damage. The Roman command structure with just 2 generals is going to cause a few problems. Simon, he has got 3 generals. It still caused him some problems. And the other thing we've got is 6 of the 8 Roman legions are new, so we've given them no melee expert, which seems a very sensible way of representing them with a minimum change in the rules. So we're going to play it out with those. This is my Magna game for you. So these are the army lists from the Magna game. So 2 generals, 4 cards each. Paulus classified as an ally just to show that they can't swap cards. So Varro cannot help Paulus by gifting any cards. I don't think they liked each other that much. The 8 legions here, 1 of which is in the camp, 7 of which are in the line, all in 6s that will be laid 2 wide, 3 deep. Paulus's cavalry on one flank with 4 who were the better Roman cavalry. I've given those melee expert. They did hang on reasonably well against fairly overwhelming odds. The Allied cavalry without, and a lot of leves still in the front, and a few Tarentine light horse. And actually, there's a skirmish unit of Syracusans as well. It's missing off the list. So on the bit that matters, really, we've got 48 bases, 192 figures of heavy infantry in the army there. I've got out all my old minifigs from the 1970s and early 80s. It's been very nostalgic. If I look at the Hannibal army we've got a legendary general for Hannibal, 2 competents on the wings. The African spearmen, as Richard said, justifying fully their superior status by now. Long spear, shield cover, and shove. So very, very strong little units there. And then 6s of troops, which are a mix of Spanish and Gauls. But I put some Spanish veterans as a 6 in the centre and Gauls either side. And then his veteran cavalry, who are superior short spear, and the Gallic standard cavalry. So not greatly better man for man than the Romans, but outnumbering them. And a swarm of Numidian cavalry, 3 Numidian cavalry and some javelinmen. 38 bases, 122 figures of heavy infantry in that army. So 122 figures to 192 figures. So you can see the difference in the weight of the 2 armies with the close order foot pressed tightly together versus the loose order Gauls and Spaniards. I've got here, Simon, if you want to just talk briefly about the armies you're using for Maximus.
I think broadly we've sort of taken the same approach to both of our armies, but 2 of the key differences are these. With the Roman army, I've gone for 3 competent commanders for what's quite a large army, with the 11 tugs and the sugs. And that played a crucial role in the game from the very first turn. So for those who weren't watching earlier, I played out my very first turn live. And this is the hand that my right wing, with my 2 better legions who have melee expert, had 3 blacks. So for anybody, sorry,
you had a Roman stall on that flank.
Completely. So for anybody who knows how Meg works, with three black cards, you could do nothing. So we ended up with the Carthaginians being able to maneuver into what turned out to be a battle-winning situation 4 turns later from the very first turn, because the Roman command structure had broken down. So it really played to the historical battle. And secondly, what I've done as well to give a bit of flavour and interest to my centre is I've interspersed with the Carthaginians the Gauls and the Spaniards. So that meant it was very important when I did the refight. I actually played it through this afternoon remotely with my son Alex, who's a big Meg player as well. Many of you will know. And that played a big part in the battle, because I played the Romans and Alex played the Carthaginians, and he was very canny about where he did the first combats with his Gauls. So he made sure he got the double shatter opportunity at any one time, and with 3 tugs in play, he got 3 opportunities, and twice it worked.
Perfect. So we've played several games today. So I think rather than show you things live by this stage, at the end of the day, we've done a lot of wargaming already. The best way is really to give you a narrative of a few games in pictorial form, and then we'll come back and have a bit of a discussion about it. I'm going to play a what-if scenario, but I can introduce it off the figures. So first of all, I'm going to let Simon talk you through the Maximus game that he played out with Alex. If I get the thing up, I'm hoping I've got these photographs in roughly the right order, Simon.
That's right.
Do forgive me if not. So this is the original tabletop and the original layout of your game, I believe.
That's a very attractive set of rules on the bottom right there, Simon.
I'm pleased with those. They look nice. I've always liked purple, I have to say, as you know.
Very imperial.
And that's village the other side as well for Cannae.
So the key thing to bring out in this image, this is the starting image, and we'll go through about 5 or 6 images. You can see here the depth of the Roman battle line, which is unusual for the Romans. So we're deliberately representing the Romans as, in my case, 8 tugs of 8 fighting 4 deep. So that is very, very resilient. Now, anybody who plays Meg will know that even if you've got troops like devastating chargers, Gauls, for example, or Germans, who are great impact, but then have no factor in melee. If you fight them 4 deep in a formation, they're going to survive. So they're there to grind their opponents down. So in the case of the Romans, they've got their impact foot hitting with a factor of 2. And then apart from my 2 legions with melee expert, nothing. But the depth gives them the ability to grind their opponents down. And it seems to me this is what was actually happening in the battle. The Romans deployed deliberately deep to try and just punch through weight of numbers what they probably recognized was superior troops to their front. And that almost worked in my battle, as we'll find out. Next image, please, Simon. So this is at the end of the first turn. So you can see here, the crucial thing here is bottom right. So bottom right here, you can see they're my 2 good legions. They're the ones with the melee expert. They got the 3 black cards, which meant they couldn't move at all. They were pinned in place. I deliberately chose not to bump up one of them with the general to allow one of the tugs to move a black to a white, because I didn't want to really expose my right flank. And you can see here the Carthaginian cavalry, the superior unit, it's top right there, Simon, and the Gallic cavalry. You can really see how they're swooping down already. And what Alex did really cleverly once he took over, I did this first move, is he really used those cleverly to pin my wing. Also, look on the left wing with the Numidian cavalry immediately double moving straight into the faces of the Roman left wing, which meant that Paulus had the left wing. He had to immediately deploy his legions, as we'll see, to try and counter that move. So next image, please, Simon. And as those of you who know me as a player, they know that I don't muck about, and it's certainly the case when I'm playing Alex. We neither of us muck about. We go for maximum score rolling, and you can see here the setup sort of really set itself up properly for what's going to happen.
That's a side view of the same situation, isn't it, Simon? I think.
That's right.
So I'll move on little flicker of those. There we go.
And we're now about to come to blows. So the next move on, we're moving towards the end of turn 2, and now the main battle line is about to start engaging. So next image, Simon. And again, the same image of the same, another view of the same image. So you can see here the main battle lines are about to engage. You can see the Numidian cavalry are really pinning the Romans back, but my right wing as the Roman player is now seriously exposed. Thanks, Simon.
And then you had this.
And then I had that. So the same wing that had the 3 black cards, the following turn, the turn after next, had 2 blacks and a green, right? So I was pinned. I could maneuver a little bit, and I'm pinned again. And all of a sudden, Alex starts seeing an opportunity, and he really cleverly starts exposing, picking apart my right flank in a very forensic way. And those of you who play Meg remotely during the lockdown will know that it's very difficult to pull a stunt or a really good maneuver on an opponent when you're playing remotely, because it's very difficult to see what's going on. But Alex, from a distance, really saw an opportunity here. Next one. And again, there's the view of the battle line. Is that the cavalry?
Is that cavalry?
If you stay there, stay down. Go back to the last one, Simon.
That one or that one?
No, I want the one with the cavalry on the flank. So what Alex did really cleverly is he saw the main battle line was getting thin. So the Spaniards and the Gauls in my recreation are in 6s, and they've now fought 2 turns of combat, and so the Roman weight of numbers is beginning to work. It's just like the real battle. It's really gratifying to see this happen, actually. The one Gallic tug had already gone. Another one was down to 3, and a Spanish tug was down to 3. But then Alex produced his masterstroke with his cavalry wing. So what he did was he pinned back, as you can see at the bottom of the picture, Simon. He pinned back my Roman cavalry with his Gallic cavalry, which allowed him to do a flank charge. Those of you who know Alistair Harley, this is the Alistair Harley maneuver number 1. As in Picard maneuver number 1. This is Alistair Harley maneuver number 1. Do a 90-degree wheel flank charge, and he went straight into one of the legions. And
so, Sam, just to get that right for people, I think what you're saying is Alex used these cavalry to bring them forward to lock these in position and keep them occupied. All of the cavalry, I suspect, were in a line sort of there.
Yeah.
And then having done that, he turned those around and rode them sort of backwards with a 180-degree and turn and move, and position them in a charge position. Is that right?
No, he did a 90-degree charge. So the cavalry.
He managed a 90-degree. They were there. Okay, just managed. Okay, fair enough.
So he did a 90-degree wheel into the flank of the legions, and as we know in Meg, if you get very lucky in the charge phase, you don't stop. You keep going. So Alex took out, and bear in mind the legions by this time, even though they were winning, with being thinned down, he took 1 legion out, rolling reds and yellows and reds and greens, throwing the general in. He took another legion out, and he took another legion out. Because remember, my legions are only 2 tugs wide. So in the one move, he took out 3 legions and won the game.
Perfect. So actually, this is them demolishing. There we go. That's all of that gone then.
All of that gone.
Whoa. Okay.
that was my son. Thanks, Alex.
So he actually killed you off as well, just for the fun of it.
Oh yeah. Oh, of course he did. Yeah. Multiple cabs. And then have you got a picture of my dead pile?
I'm going to just find it. So that's the body count, yeah?
That's the body count.
So that's I don't know, if you added the number of figures up, that's probably not too far off the historical method.
Yep.
Hang on a minute. I'm going to just do there's 4 to a base, and there are 8, 32. They're about 10 deep then. So there's about 40, 80, about 160. It's about 160 legionary figures there.
Yeah.
Out of 100, yeah, okay, that's about half the legionaries in your army and the
yeah,
dead pile.
Yeah, and the ones who are left are about to be sent down to Sicily. So
there we go. So that one we have a victory for Rome due to some clever work on the flank and an envelopment attack by the cavalry in a situation where the Romans weren't that far from breaking the line by the looks of it.
They almost got through.
Stages. This Carthaginian line that's left is looking a bit thin now.
Yep.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. So let me tell you my 2 games. So I'll do a similar quick run through. If I do that, those of you who joined me earlier, this is the position that I started in. I can bring it forward from there. I had the 2 armies about to hit. Now my setup was a little bit different. So somebody just asked the question, but the actual setup, my V-lights, for instance, was spread out single rank all across the front as a protective screen in front of the Romans. For your benefit, Bob, Duckworth, they're actually here now behind the line because the Roman legions have walked through them, which you can do in Meg because they now want to charge. And what I put up here is these are the cards spent to do the charges at this time in the game. So that's a block charge for the Romans, and there was a block charge of Roman infantry there. And there's a block charge of cavalry over on the other side. And Hannibal had actually spent 2 cards to hold the line here, so not to charge. And these are going to hit, and he's trying to buy time. These are going to hit, and they're going to press forward 1 base width. This is slightly off as the photo. I adjusted it slightly. There should be 1 base width difference. So they'll hit along this section here. I've nudged the figures, but they won't get to these in the first round of combat. So if I just flick through what happened in the game, it actually was a mighty interesting one. So now we're in the situation where the crunch has started to happen. And actually, interestingly, in this game, probably one of the biggest features, it was Hannibal actually doing very poor job as a legendary general for quite a long time. So you'll see here he's got no yellows and no reds, despite having 5 cards. He keeps picking up white, blacks, and greens. And that limits his ability to do anything particularly clever, actually, as you work your way through here. The shove effect has already pushed some of the line back. So these have been shoved back over here. These have broken off over here. No, sorry, these haven't been hit yet. Sorry, this is the first round. Those have been pushed back. These haven't been pushed back. These didn't press forward because it was more than the base width to impact the remaining troops here. And over on this flank, the cavalry are in. I probably have a separate shot of a few bits of that. So the infantry on this side is a hit. The only thing Hannibal can do with his cards, but it did prove useful, is he moved the Spanish spearmen up onto the flank of the Romans, ready to try and turn and fight them. The cavalry one was quite dramatic. In turn 3, the Numidians, for a loss of 1 base, shot the Allied wing to pieces and routed both the Tarentine light horse and the Gallic cavalry on that flank, thereby opening that flank up. And within another turn, we're swarming around the back of the line. So you've got the Numidians now reorganizing. These ones are actually in missile range of the back of these legions already. So Varro's got himself fairly surrounded at this point. So it's looking fairly sweaty. But on the other flank, Hasdrubal's cavalry have broken through. They've taken a bit of a loss. They've taken the base off each of them, but they have broken through and broken Pallas's cavalry and made that flank open up. But meanwhile, it's all got a bit scary because in the middle, with Hannibal having had very little to play with to recover wounds off or bring anything back or break off or anything, they've had to fight extensively in the middle. and the Romans managed to break through the line. And in the narrative of the battle, there's talk of the Romans driving the Gauls back and breaking elements of them, breaking through the line. So these are about to go. These ones are about to go. They're down to 3 bases and a wound. That's a casualty. If I do it that way, it tells you it's a casualty. And unfortunately, for Hannibal's side, these are the cab rolls that went with it, the morale spreading effect. So the one on this side lost an entire base with a skull, and the Spanish in the centre lost an entire base with a skull. So trouble is spreading in the middle, which is a real challenge. So this is the situation at that point. Rome has broken through in the centre here, punched a hole. These Roman legionaries are now regrouping, ready to come back into the battle. Unfortunately, there weren't enough cards to stall their pursuit somewhere here, which would have been nice. The cavalry on this side have won and driven forward and pursued, but need to get themselves back into the fight. The Numidians are totally swarming this side, but of course they're not that powerful against heavies. Importantly, if you haven't played it, you can't charge heavy troops with skirmishes in these rules. It's just not allowed until they're nearly broken. In fact, if we look through history, you can't really find any example of skirmishes clashing into heavy troops that were anything but nearly broken. It would be suicide to be a man in a loincloth charging the flank of a cataphract. I certainly wouldn't be doing it if it was me. The shoves have helped quite a bit in this game. They've caused quite a few casualties on the Carthaginian line. So the envelopment is happening, but it's very sweaty in the middle. And as we continue the story, now we get the envelopment on the flank. So the Spanish, the African spearmen have turned onto the flank, and the Romans have responded by turning base to face. So there's pressure on the flank happening there. These skilled shooters here did no damage actually that turn, which helped them a lot, and lost the middle unit. However, on the other side where they've turned here, the spears on the superior spearmen on this side have done quite a bit of damage here. I mean, they are superior spear with shove against non-melee expert Romans. These haven't got any melee experts, so they're well up. So they did a lot of damage on the flank. So this bit where Paulus is holding them together is now looking quite sweaty on the other side. And here you've got a bit of a shot down the line now as it's all coming to a conclusion. We've got the returning cavalry who are now in range to charge some enemy in the rear, but we've got returning Romans who are also in a position to charge Hannibal and his Spanish in the rear. And the Numidians have got these guys pretty well surrounded, but they're not doing them a huge amount of damage. So the tussle continues, and we get very little damage caused on this side. They hold on well. But from the Roman side, it starts to look quite good because they've broken through in another place. So these are broken through as well. These are ready to charge a rear. These are ready to charge a rear. And essentially, we have all hell breaks loose in that charge phase. I think it was turn 6. These Roman legions smash into the Spanish rear. These ones with the wheels smash into the legionary rear. And Hannibal stuck in the thick of it fighting. And I think I can safely say, if I remember rightly, that nobody survived that. So 4 Spanish in the middle, hit by these 2 in the rear. I think they lost 2.5 bases, and these guys lost 1.5 bases. They're all broken, and Hannibal was actually wounded in the fight and had to evacuate off to the right. It's everything routing, and the game finished just before the Carthaginians could charge into another rear. The Romans managed to break the Carthaginian centre on this side, where the Roman infantry here broke through the remaining Gauls. So actually, Hannibal lost the 5 centre units of his battle line, and at the time had destroyed 2 Roman cavalry and 1 legion and a lot of skirmishers. So it would be about a 59 that would have actually resulted in that particular end result. And the only thing that possibly I could have done differently as Hannibal is at some point the Numidians could potentially have charged the rear of the line, because one of them was within one of breaking, but they're so good as shooters with 2 greens. It seemed probably better to do that than risk them getting killed by them turning around and not being able to do it some more. So a fantastic battle that in the early stages really looked like Hannibal was going to win it and work his way through. But what's fascinating is it was lost because Hannibal drew very bad cards and couldn't do the job he was there to do, which was to hold the centre together and retire it and fall back. He didn't manage any break-offs or any fallbacks, and only managed a couple of wound recoveries in the whole battle, and ended up being wounded twice, in fact, by the end of the battle. So he would have at that point have been captured and taken back to Rome. So my score in the normal battle now is 3-1 to Hannibal now. So that's a victory for Rome in the main game. But what fascinates me particularly is going back to the political side of the two consuls. So I wanted to try something different. So I'm going to share this one with you. This is my alternative Cannae with a totally different deployment. So I'm now imagining that I'm the sole commander, the proper commander of the Romans, and I don't have to fight for troops with my opposing number. So this river clearly isn't a very difficult one because all the armies were fording it. So it must be shallow and relatively easy to cross, but it certainly is worthy of rough going. So it's some sort of flank to work on. And there are troops, as Richard said, that are a legion, probably a whole legion, defending the camp up here that they wanted to play some part in the battle that belonged to Paulus. So if I was fighting that battle and had sole command and didn't have to fight with the double issue of two commanders, this very difficult system with the two equal consuls and alternate days, my tendency would be to deploy all the Roman legions like this, anchored on the river, and use the river for some protection, centered and locked in by the legion on the camp to give them the extra security, and mass all of my cavalry on this side, spread out to give maximum chance of delaying the envelopment. Hannibal, seeing that, not being stupid, I've given the benefit of him actually deploying his infantry along the river and then massing all his cavalry on this side. So if I look at the two armies in deployment form head on, we've got legions there. That's the melee expert first legion in the center and another melee expert one on the wing. There's Paulus commanding everything here and Varro commanding all of the rest. And now I've got Paulus's Roman cavalry here, the allied cavalry there, the Tarentine cavalry and some skirmishes on the end. So a little bit more of a block of the cavalry there. Now, of course, that wouldn't happen with the two consular system because there's pretty much no way that that Paulus with his command would give Varro his cavalry, which were these. So probably the two consular system forced those cavalry over here and set up the two vulnerable wings. If I take then the other side, I've got the same deployment of troops in order for Hannibal here, and then I've got the Spanish veteran cavalry, the Gallic cavalry, and the horde of Numidians. Now the difference in this battle relative to the way it's deployed originally is, of course, there were those 8 cavalry versus just those 4 cavalry on a wing, which is quite dominant, a 2-to-1 advantage, and on the other wing there were some cavalry and skirmishes against the Numidians. But massed this way, you've got 2 heavy cavalry against 2 heavy cavalry, a big advantage in the Numidians. So I'm wondering, in my refight, can that actually buy the Romans enough time? So I played it through this afternoon. So to run through the tale. So there they are actually closing. So this is again, Rob, you can see the line of skirmishers in front here spread out as a screen to protect the Romans from suffering any damage on the way in. We had a very interesting section when it came to charges. The first set of charges, sorry, I've skipped it, it's there. So what I've done is put the cards here that have been used to declare charges. Hannibal's played that, so a yellow to stop forced charges, white upgraded to green to make it a block, and he can thereby do all 5 of the ones along here, which will keep all the Gauls from charging. So he spent 2 to do that. On this side with his 4 cards, Paulus has managed to use a white to pull those skirmishes back and a green to put the other levies over to the side to allow him to block charge with all of the legions. Varro didn't get enough cards to do that in one go, so these legions are not charging yet. And there's a block charge going on with the cavalry here, and there's nothing. I've not done anything there. Where I haven't turned any cards over, nothing has happened. So it was actually quite a good impact for the Romans in the first in the first charge. They created a shove in the center, which was quite helpful, and they killed 2 bases of the Gauls on this particular area of the flank under Paulus. The cavalry crunch was fairly nasty. There were 2 casualties on the Roman side and 2 wounds inflicted on this side. So it looks like the Carthaginian cavalry are going to win out at this stage. They're getting the advantage 2 versus 2. After the melee phase, it's even worse. The Romans have managed to carve quite a chunk of these Gauls apart. They've got one of them down to near breaking point already in the centre. So there's a weak point emerging in the line. and the African spearmen have had to spread out a bit to the left because there is an advance coming of the legion that's over the river, which you can't quite see on that photo, but probably will see on a later one. And this is what happened in the first melee phase of the cavalry combat, and it's a real bloodbath with both sides losing a base each. So everything's sitting on the brink. Two left, 3 left with a wound, 3 left. So there's a heck of a lot of damage, but nothing quite broken at that stage. So they've held on for a little while. So they're buying a bit of time. That puts me there. So this is a wider picture now. You can see down here. That's the situation I've just described. Afterwards, there's only 2 of each of those cavalry left. They're on the way out. Paulus has used his cards to pull these levies back from being a skirmish screen to free him to charge next time. The Numidians here are now in shooting range, so all hell is going to break loose over there. But they're well away at the moment from the main battle line where all the true action is. So here we have the next set of charges. So the Romans charging. Now this is it. This is a file of a tug that's there. So they're charging the ones that can charge into here, and the entire Roman line is going in. And there we have the crunch and the initial impact. There was actually a shatter on the Gallic side that did a little bit of damage here, but otherwise it was relatively passive. But then we get this on the cavalry fight. So the main cavalry side becomes mayhem. The Punic cavalry, sorry, the Spanish veteran cavalry lose a base and break. Fortunately, the Gallic cavalry survived the cab tests, and both of the Roman cavalry break. So the Carthaginians have won this flank, but they've won this flank with only 2 bases of Gallic cavalry left. So there's not a huge amount to come back and do a big envelopment. It's mainly going to have to be Numidians who are going to come and cause the trouble, who by now have shot away the skirmishers opposite them and are weaving around the flank here. You can see the remaining 2 cavalry up there well away from the battle. And you can see the shoves having an effect here where the Romans are pushing the line of these Gauls back and have nearly broken them. There's a little error there. I forgot to take off that wound marker, but it should have gone when I picked up a base. But this is the point at which Hannibal gets some cards. So he also has had very bad cards through most of the battle, but he wakes up at this point and can perhaps do something useful. Which is, let me just see where I'm up to. So that is there. So a little later in the scrap, after the fight has happened, he can try and buy time in the center. So he's going to do 2 break-off moves with 4 of his 5 cards. He's going to upgrade that to red, and with a green do a break-off with those 2. So those 2 are going to pull back, and that gives them another charge phase. And then he's going to do a break-off with these as well, to fall back to here to give another charge phase, then try and buy time for the Numidians to come and cause some serious trouble. So that's the situation after that's happened. What's also interesting, it creates another charge phase, and actually there's a weakness in the Roman line here. We'll come back to that in a minute. It's a scary moment for a bit. And that's the wider picture at that point. So the remaining cavalry of Hasdrubal, all 2 of them, trying to come back to the battle to give some help. There's the pushed back line of troops here, and there's going to be another clash along on this side. And Hannibal's returned to poor cards again, if you noticed last time. So again, Hannibal is going to hold these Gauls from charging. The Romans are coming in, so they paid for these particular charges. During the movement phase last time, having pulled back, it's put a fair gap between them here, and Hannibal didn't want to charge because we wanted to let these Numidians shoot up the rear of the infantry, but they actually did very little damage. He got a bit worn out by now. And here's the famous crunch. So this was the one chance Hannibal had to bust the line. He threw himself into combat, +2 for devastating charger. +2. Sorry, I got that completely wrong, didn't I? That should be +2 there. It should have been a yellow versus a white. Forget that. Ignore that. That's author fatigue, but it didn't work anyway. So the gods of wargaming kept me under control. That was very funny. I just realised. And if we keep going now, see, I make mistakes too after a while. Meanwhile, on the left-hand side of the Carthaginian line, all hell breaks loose. The Romans have bust through here and done serious damage here. This one on the end is nearly broken. This one is broken. The cab test took one off the Spanish as well. So actually, all sorts of stuff is starting to break. The cab tests weren't as terrible as in the previous game, but still nibble away and cause some extra chaos, breaking some more troops. And if I just do this, which basically means that in this particular game, Paulus wins the day. Because on his flank, with plenty of time on his hands and no pressure to his flanks, the 4 Roman legions here have actually managed to demolish the Carthaginian flank on this side. And Hasdrubal hasn't managed to return with enough cavalry to do enough damage on the other flank. And as that continued to play out, we end up with a situation like this. The Romans here, having not suffered any casualties at all, turned round and walked that way and present their shield cover to the Numidians. So they managed to buy time over here. And there weren't enough cards left after everything Hannibal wanted to do to advance and pressure them. And he wants to try and kill these off. And this is falling apart on this side. So instead of the African spearmen turning a flank in this battle, it's the Romans on this side who've done a turn 19. They're in the flank of the Spanish. And unsurprisingly, fairly quickly, that proves terminal. The entire flank, the entire centre piece collapses from the left flank inwards. And Hannibal was wounded once in the combat and again in the right, so he's twice wounded in this battle as he ran off to the side and would have been captured. So it's a very interesting battle to play out, because if you just look what's happened by deploying in this way against the river, even if that was just rough terrain, and by using the troops here, the troops started there are here. They've actually played a part in the battle. As Richard said, they've advanced towards the camp and then cut in. The cavalry here have been too slow to come back, having had a really bad time, so are basically spent and not effective enough to get in the way. And there's been the freedom enough for the Roman legions, and they've survived the 2 scary bits, really, which were the moment when the Numidians were shooting with green dice here, and the moment where Hannibal joined the charge there to be 2 up, even though I gave him 4 up to be generous. I've always liked Hannibal. There you go. It must have been my subconscious trying to allow him to do a little bit better. So there we have it. So that's a what if. We can discuss a little bit, kick around, but I think that's the what if for me that says that while I believe Hannibal is a brilliant tactician and did a fantastic job of actually retiring back and using the centre and supporting it, and presumably on the day didn't get terrible cards, the reason this battle was lost to me was the 2 consul system of Rome and the pressure of the political system. A, forcing the fight in the first place on a field where there's enough freedom of movement that cavalry are effective. And B, forcing a deployment where the Romans had to have cavalry on both flanks because each of the generals effectively owned some units and they wouldn't be very keen to give them to the other. So the type of deployment I've just put into this game, I don't think the Romans could have achieved with their 2 consul system. And that's fundamentally what's let them down, because on average play here, once you put all the cavalry on one flank, it's slower. It's much slower to get an envelopment to work. It works, but it takes more time and there's potential risk in it. It's not as much of a dead certainty as it actually is in the actual deployment of the battle. So in short, the 2 consuls shot each other in the feet. Simon, do you have any thoughts on that? As you've not seen that, this is all new to Simon too. I've only played it this afternoon, finished it about an hour before we started. So thoughts from you, Simon, as a historian?
In actual fact, I'll give you thoughts as a wargamer, really, because when we're faced with that kind of situation where we've got playing any game, but in our case, Mortem at Gloriam, when you've got a protected flank, your natural instinct is to deploy a line of heavy infantry linked to that protected flank across the table and put the cavalry on the open flank. So it's a very, very natural thing for a commander in real life or playing wargaming to do. And it really does show you how ingrained in the Roman political class as it was that the 2 consuls wouldn't share the cavalry. Because it's such a logical thing to do, and yet they ignored it because they wanted to keep their own cavalry and they wanted to be the person who played the key role in the battle in defeating the great bugbear of the Second Punic War, Hannibal.
Indeed, and you can see they're linked to the cavalry, because I think it's true in the actual battle history, both of the Roman generals actually started fighting with the cavalry, and they had sub commanders of theirs acting as control of the legions. I think in the centre. I think I'm right in saying I remember that from the reading of the original Polybius and version of it. I think it was in Polybius. So it's really interesting that it would be very, very difficult to actually engineer the type of setup that I've just done, which as a wargamer or probably as a general, if you were a single general in command, is a reasonably obvious thing to do.
Yeah.
And it's pretty difficult to deal with as the Carthaginians, because the weight of the Roman legions now have some power because they can attack without fear, and there is enough Roman cavalry to stall the cavalry of Hannibal. They're only outnumbered 10,000 to 6,000 now instead of 4,000 to 1,600 on one flank. So the ratios are very, very different on the flank. So I think it's a fascinating refight. It tells me an awful lot of what they did. Richard's just put a note up saying, yes, you're right, Varro and Paulus started with their respective cavalry. I thought so. Thank you, Richard. I was pretty sure I'd read that in my reading of the history, which certainly shows that they would have a natural attachment to the cavalry that they were gifted. I think there's no way they would have lent them to each other. So it was impossible, absolutely impossible. So what a fascinating defeat for the Roman two-consul system. I hope you've all enjoyed that. I'm going to open it up for questions. I can see a bit of good discussion going on elsewhere. Yeah, we're even getting triple C Napoleonics mentioned by something. And somebody said that even the author gets overexcited. I get overexcited all the time. I've been wargaming since I was 11, so any time I get some nice, especially historical refights and campaigns, they're my two favourite bits actually. I really love those because you see the what ifs and the challenges of history appearing on the tabletop, and that's the thing I particularly love. So, opening to questions. Type up questions as you see them, areas you want to discuss, and we will kick them around. And I'll take comments from people and try and feed them back in as well. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you're watching on Facebook Live, by all means, type a comment on the stream. I usually manage to spot them and pick things up. Let's see what pops on the screen. Okay, I've got a repeat one from somebody privately, which is the one we had earlier, Simon. So we may as well cover that. The question of what was Hannibal thinking when he invaded Italy anyway?
Shall I kick off that one?
Yes. Yeah.
There's always been a debate, I think, Simon, about whether Hannibal was a good strategic general or not. So we know he was a superb tactical general, but whether he was a good strategic general is a different question. If you look at the situation he found himself in southern Gaul, he may have been better advised to actually remain there and draw the Romans to him, so the Romans had the overextended supply lines. Because remember, he didn't have control of the sea lanes. So therefore, once in Italy, one of the key flaws he had in his strategy there was that he couldn't guarantee supplying himself other than relying on his Italian allies. And once the luck turned against him, that diminished to the extent where he had to rely on convoys coming from North Africa, and they just didn't arrive, which is why the campaign ultimately failed. So the common sense thing to do for a strategist would have been to remain, I would argue, in Gaul and draw the Romans to him.
Yeah, so as we covered earlier, I agree with that entirely from my reading. My view of Hannibal is that he was one of the best tactical generals ever. He was very clever at actually manipulating and managing battles. Cannae, he was gifted it a little bit, but he still had to be clever in the middle to pull it off. Trebia was fantastic. Trasimene was fantastic. So he fought some fantastic battles when he managed to gain the advantage. So he was a great tactician, but I've always felt he was a pretty poor strategist, and that probably his father was a better strategist actually and better diplomat. So to me, his better play would have been to conquer southern Gaul, stay outside Italy, and as you say, make the Romans come to him, and actually use whatever wealth they'd then accumulated to rebuild a navy, turn all the ports of the southern Med into shipbuilding ports. Because the only way they could really compete with Rome in the Mediterranean was to have a navy that was in some way significant again. And without that, they were stuck. And his trip around Italy really reminds me in a funny sort of way of Rommel's march across the desert, where he ran out of supplies, or Patton's Third Army charge in World War II, where he ran out of fuel. It's very difficult to see how they could sustain it. And add to that the fact that he's got allies with him, and a lot of allies who generally get quite rebellious if there isn't some action and some looting to be done or something to be won. He probably had a really big strategic problem when he went into Italy that was always going to be there. And funnily, his only chance possibly was to march on Rome and try and force it into submission at that time. But I think I'm right in my reading of it. They captured the 10,000 Romans and about another 5,000, I think, who were retired to the smaller camp. There were actually 2 Roman camps. But also interesting as a victor, he was not destructive towards them at all. In fact, he ransomed them all for a fee each. So they all bought their own freedom with money, and he took the cash. So,
but he needed it.
He wasn't terribly ruthless in finishing them off. So it is very, very interesting.
And you can guarantee
you've got a few more questions here. I'm going to pop them up. So how would you convert this to Pacto? This is from Lee Sanders in Birmingham. Hi, Lee. Good to have you joining us. I think it converts relatively simply, actually, if you just take every single one of these and turn them into little 2s in Pacto. It's actually going to be pretty close. You've got to get the width of the 2 armies about right. So you're going to have 7 base widths of legions. And at the moment, you've only got 7 base widths of the Carthaginians. So you probably need to add a couple of Carthaginians, Gauls to the center of the line just to even it up. But other than that, it should work perfectly well as it is by converting most of these down into 2s. And you should get very much the same sort of dynamics. If anything, probably I'd say in Pacto versions there's a better chance for the Romans because cab effects, if they do make a breakthrough, can be a little more dramatic in finishing off a Pacto game because of the small tug sizes. Let's take a few others. And one from Nick Gagger. If it had been politically possible, how do you think the war would have panned out if the Romans had declined to fight at Cannae? That's a very, very fine question because I think Hannibal was stuck. So this is where I think Simon Elliott is saying that it was a battle they probably didn't need to fight. In reality, I suspect that the Fabian strategy was the right one, which was to back off and actually not fight and actually fight a logistics war. And probably my suspicion would be that with continuing problems of supply as he ran out of territories to ransack, that the allied part of his army would start to crumble and he would struggle to keep a large force in the field. And at that point, he'd be forced to withdraw probably via a northern route back into Gaul.
Can I add there as well? Simon? It's important to remember that in conflict, propaganda and PR, speaking as a PR person, PR are as important as the conflict itself. And here, Hannibal is absolutely relying on the propaganda of his capabilities as a commander to win over the Italian allies that he needs, not only to keep himself in the field, but help him fight his battles. And so the longer the Romans can play without having another major defeat against them, the more the Italian allies are going to start thinking about whether they should stop supporting him or not. Remember, at the time, of course, the whole of Italy is not Roman. There are a number of Italian states and Greek states, etc. So therefore, Hannibal has to keep on the front foot all the time. So if the Romans had withheld battle, that may have raised a few eyebrows amongst his Italian allies.
I think the other thing reading it is Hannibal was very smart, and he knew full well about the 2 consular system and the conflict it caused. And he also knew very well the psychology of the 1 year in command pressure point. So I think he's very clever at playing to those anyway. He knows full well that's part of the baiting that went on prior to the battle. So it would have been quite difficult probably for them not to fight. But I think if they managed to hold that, it would have been very difficult for Hannibal. One from Richard here. Did the Carthaginians not contest the seas because they didn't have the manpower for rowers? I'm not a total expert on the naval bit, but my reading of events was it was one of the reasons why Rome imposed such a high financial price after the First Punic War. That navies are expensive to build and run and man, and part of the logic was to starve them of financial resources to do that. I can't remember the Punic attack. It was something like 3,200 talents or something. It was a very, very big number. That they demanded as part of the settlement, and then they bolted on another 800, I think, for some other reason they came up with afterwards. So the Romans were very good at putting a financial squeeze on Carthage after the First Punic War, which was probably part of their interest in going over to Spain and gathering as much resources as they could from Spain, and especially the silver. Simon, any more on that one?
Certainly do. It's worth remembering how expensive, as you say, these ships were to operate. The key thing to remember here is that we've all grown up looking at movies like Antony and Cleopatra, etc., where we are given the image that the people rowing these galleys were actually slaves, but they weren't. For the large part, certainly with the Romans, they were actually professionals, as with the Hellenistic navies. So this is the elite military technology of its day with these various sized galleys. So you're not going to crew them as slaves. They're crewed with experienced, well-trained people rowing the oars. And they are expensive to pay for. They're expensive to maintain. They're expensive to feed. So therefore, you have to be successful militarily and on the front foot to be able to afford to run a navy of that size. And by this stage, the Romans are on the front foot and the Carthaginians are on the back foot. So to go back to my mantra about the whole background to this conflict, it's the loss of naval supremacy at the end of the First Punic War of the Carthaginians.
Interesting. Let's see if there's any more. There's one more here. It's from Nick. Were the Carthaginians other than Hannibal prepared for war, or did Hannibal force it on Carthage? Okay, my reading of the situation of this is it goes back to how Hannibal was brought up. So he was brought up in the period after the First Punic War with a lasting hatred of Rome. And there is an interesting quote in either Polybius or Livy, I can't remember which one it is, when asked about it, that Hannibal says to some of the captives that he wanted them to feel that they have been defeated in the way that Carthage felt defeated prior in its battle with Rome. So I think there was something in Hannibal where he wanted to inflict a lesson on them and give them some of their own medicine. And that was probably an ego thing that's built up through his childhood as Hamilcar's son. So my read is that there's a fair bit of that going on in the psychology, and that Hannibal took the opportunity to sort of force a bit of war on Carthage by the events that went on at Saguntum, where the supporters of Carthage were massacred. And you've got to remember, he reacted quite quickly and is a reasonable distance from Carthage at that time. So we don't know, obviously. I don't think Simon may add more to it, but my suspicion is there was a lot of resentment built into Hannibal and hatred of Rome and a desire to inflict some damage on them, and he felt he had the opportunity to do so, and his gradually escalating success kept him going.
And to add to that, I just say there's a sort of an unwritten part of the story here, which is we've discussed the fact that the Roman leaders are under huge amounts of pressure from the political classes back in Rome. Well, Hannibal's under exactly the same kind of pressure himself from the Carthaginian political classes back in Carthage. Different in nature, but he's got to keep winning. He's got to keep going. He's got to be on the front foot. Bringing all that way back to the question of whether the strategy was correct to invade Italy, well, clearly this is one of the factors which was behind his thinking.
I think we've picked up pretty much everything in the question set in one form or another. Unless anybody's going to type something up soon, I think we might call it a day. I've had a fantastic day's wargaming. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I actually really enjoyed playing the what-if scenario. It raised a lot of interesting questions to me. Thanks to those of you joining on Facebook. It's Simon's choice of battle next, and then back to me. So do you have one, Simon, that you want to throw in for the next one?
Well, in actual fact, Simon, what I'm going to suggest is we do some proper conflict simulation, sort of experimental archaeology almost, using Meg. What I want to examine is Paulinus defeated Boudica in the so-called Battle of Watling Street. And what I'm going to suggest is we both take two separate candidate sites for what is a titanic battle in British history, really, because if you think about it, if Paulinus had lost, the province of Britannia could have fallen, and then our history in Britain may have been very different. So this is a really important battle. So you and I choose a different battle site, and there are about 10 candidate sites, and we come up with our own ways of reflecting a battle where Paulinus was allegedly outnumbered 10-1. So it's going to be interesting which mechanisms we put in play to actually reflect that, and then see if we can look at our games, whether one of the candidate sites is better than the other.
That's So that sounds excellent. Do we need 2 long red-haired wigs to do this?
No.
Good. That's a great relief. In that case, I'll do it. Very good. That's good. Okay, so we'll do Boudica's last battle then. So we'll do Boudica's battle in opening straight is the next one, and I'll give you a preview. The one I'm going to choose after that, which is a great favourite of mine, is the Battle of Ruspina and Caesar's amazing escape from the Pompeian Numidians when he was near enveloped and managed to escape with about 60% of his army back to his camp after being caught out foraging. So that's 2 cracking, very different battles to do in the August and September events. We're basically going to do them monthly, so that should work very well. Somebody's just asked, there's a question about planned release for Napoleonics. Just a quick update for people on other Triple C systems. The Napoleonics are up for testing on the test forum. If anybody wants to try playing them, just drop me a message and I can connect you on there and you can have a doodle around with them. They will be out next year, probably around the middle of next year. The next main set that's going to be out will be the World War II ones, Divisions of Steel, which are also up there for play at the moment and will probably be out at Christmas. And Renaissance of Gloriam should be out in about February next year. So that's the schedule now agreed with PSC. So we've got World War II for Christmas, Renaissance for Easter, and Napoleonics probably mid to late summer next year, at which point we'll have 4 of the Triple C sets out and have covered large chunks of history. They use the basic same core system, but it's used in a very different way to get the feel of each period. You'll see when you try it. I won't say more than that here. I can cover it on some videos some other time. Thank you all for joining us. I think we'll call it a day at that. Everybody keep enjoying Meg. If you know how to play it already, if you were just listening and haven't quite got into it, get yourself a copy and get some help, and I'm sure you'll join the fun and enjoy it. The purple revolution is growing rapidly. We're getting some great press, great publicity, and I believe the trade sales from PSC were very impressive. So it's heading all over the world now to retail shops and will be at all shows. So really delighted, and what a great communal effort it's been. Thank you to Simon Elliott for joining me again today, providing all his excellent historical knowledge, and to Richard for adding his thoughts on lists. We're always here to help. We're a very friendly community. And on that happy note, that's been a good fight from me.
And a good fight from him.
Good night all.
Good night.